Good morning, everyone. I'm Veronica Horn, President of the Saginaw County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for coming this morning. It's really good to be able to get together for the On the Record Navigating Auto Insurance Reform webinar. Before we get started, I want to cover a few logistical things about today's event and how it will work so everyone will have the best viewing experience. We're going to be muting everyone except for the person who is speaking. That way, we'll avoid the echoes you sometimes hear in the background. Today's presentation is pretty comprehensive and will take the full time allotted for the event. Therefore, we will be unable to take questions during the program. However, at the end of the presentation, Peter will provide you with contact information if you would like to pursue your questions with him and his staff. The chat feature will also be disabled during this presentation, and we won't be monitoring it. And now to begin our program, I'd like to invite all of you to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One of the top priorities for the Chamber is to actively educate and advocate issues important to the business community on behalf of our almost 1,000 members. And that's why we're here today. We also find ourselves in a completely new environment for doing business and for just day-to-day living. As you know, we're still under a stay-at-home order until May 28th. And so our chamber staff quickly got together with our board and decided that when we look at our three core competencies to communicate, connect, and influence, the best thing that we could do for you, our members, was to get you timely information, accurate information, and connect you with resources to help keep your businesses moving forward even during this health crisis. So we're offering many of our events now virtually. We're looking ahead to pushing some of our events that would have been held in the spring over the summer months. And hopefully we'll be able to be face-to-face again very soon. Right now, I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to any and all elected officials and public servants who are able to join us today, as well as all of our sponsors for this event, as you see on your screen. Dow, AT&T, Saginaw Valley State University, Consumers Energy, Great Lakes Bay Michigan Works, Nextier, and Saginaw Future Inc. We truly appreciate their support as we continue to bring you informative programs to help you plan for the future. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, a longtime chamber member and a very dear friend. Saginaw Bay Underwriters has been helping customers in the Great Lakes Bay region with insurance needs since 1863, not 1963, 1863. With two offices in Saginaw, one in Bay City and one in Midland, Saginaw Bay Underwriters provides business and commercial insurance, employee benefits, personal, home, and auto coverage, and life insurance to more than 12,000 customers. As one of the largest independent insurance agencies in Michigan, they employ nearly 70 professionals, all of whom are committed to providing exceptional service and guidance. Now, here to discuss navigating auto insurance reform is Saginaw Bay Underwriter President and CEO, Peter Ewend. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. So let me start by pulling my screen up here so that we can have a PowerPoint. And what I want to talk about today is navigating auto insurance reform. It was 7 weeks ago, almost to the day, March 20th, that we were all supposed to be together at Apple Mountain, and this was going to be a live presentation. Well, certainly since March 20th, a lot of things have happened with COVID-19, and our world has changed. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is auto insurance reform is moving forward and is going to become effective on July 2nd of this year. Today, what I want to do is go through auto insurance reform with you in the hopes that you'll have a better understanding by the end of this presentation. So let me start with an introduction, and let me tell you what our goal is today. Number one, I think that you're going to find out that this is a fairly complex subject, although maybe that's not what you thought before the presentation today. So my goal is to take the complexities of auto insurance reform, help simplify them for you, and then provide you with a better understanding so that you can make a more informed decision when you have to look at either your personal auto policy or your business auto policy. Today's topic is going to impact everyone that's listening on the webinar today, whether it be that you have a personal insurance policy that you have to take a look at, or if you're a business or an organization that you have a commercial policy that you want to take a look at. I thought I would share with you some of the common questions that my clients are asking me, and it might be some of the questions that you have. By the end of this presentation, we'll review these questions and you'll have all of the answers. So oftentimes what I hear is, does my auto insurance, health insurance, and workers' compensation cover the same things? Are there people in my household who are no longer covered under my policy? Should I keep my unlimited medical, called PIP, or switch to one of the new lower limits? Do I have more liability now under the new law? And what other facts should I consider to make an informed decision? So let me cover briefly what our agenda is going to be today so you know what to expect. We're going to start out with a little bit of the history of Michigan no fault and talk about personal injury protection, or I'll refer to this as PIP. We're going to look at the new PIP limit options. We're going to look at the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association. You may know it as the MCCA, and look at the fees that they have. We'll look at the new PIP order of priority and the new risks that this presents. We'll also take a look at the increased liability the new law brings and how to protect yourself and your business. And then finally, I'll give you some takeaways that I feel are very important. Now, at this point, as I've gone through PIP, MCCA, you're probably starting to feel like maybe this is insurance alphabet soup. So rest assured that as we go through the presentation, I'll clearly define what these terms mean so that you have a better understanding. Let's start out with the history of Michigan no fault and talk about personal injury protection. So as we look at the history of Michigan no fault, it began in 1973, and the idea behind it is that when there were going to be payments made for collision coverage, medical treatment, and wage loss, it would be paid by your policy, and we wouldn't have to worry about who was at fault in the accident. So let me give you an example. In the state of Michigan, if you were driving your car and you got into an accident, and let's say you had $20,000 worth of damage to your vehicle, it would be your automobile policy that would pay under the collision to fix your automobile. Take that same accident and have that happen in the state of Illinois, just as an example. And let's say that the person that hit me was at fault. Well, then what I would do is I would look to their insurance company to pay for the damage to my car. So you can see with no fault what's happening is it's coming back to our policy. Why was it that back in 1973, Michigan decided to look at no fault? Well, number one, the idea was that it was meant to help reduce the number of lawsuits. And the second part of it is that we no longer had to determine who was at fault for medical coverage to apply. Prior to July 2nd, 2020, and I point out to everyone that this new law, for the most part, we'll get into some areas that it's already in place, but for the most part, it takes place July 2nd. Why it's not July 1st, I'm not quite sure, but July 2nd, 2020. But prior to July 2nd, so right now, everybody on their policy has unlimited PIP coverage or medical coverage, and we'll get into that in just a second as far as the definitions. So what happens on that is currently, if I'm involved in an accident and I'm at fault, I can only be sued in case of serious injury, disfigurement, or death. What we're going to learn today is that with the new law, what I can now be sued for is going to be much broader, and I'm going to have more exposure as a vehicle owner and a driver in the state of Michigan. As I've talked about this with a number of my clients, friends, and others, what I've come to notice is that people become confused as we start talking about these different buckets. And I thought maybe the easiest way of outlining this is to look at a couple of different buckets that we're going to talk about. So the first bucket that we're going to talk about is what we call PIP coverage. And PIP coverage is a first-party coverage that's going to cover your medical and a lot more. So if I'm involved in an automobile accident, I get hurt, it's going to be the PIP coverage that's going to help pay for my medical. The second thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about bodily injury. This is separate from PIP. Bodily injury is a third-party coverage. So what this means is it pays if I'm to get sued. So for example, I'm driving my car, I run through a stop sign and I injure somebody. They decide to sue me because I was at fault in the accident and I created a serious injury to them. At that point, it's my bodily injury limits that are going to cover me if I get sued. The third bucket, and we're not going to spend much time on this at all today because really auto insurance reform, with the exception of one small piece, didn't change any of this. And those are optional coverages. What do I mean by optional coverages? Well, it could be things like collision if you're involved in an automobile accident, comprehensive coverage, which could be theft of your vehicle, maybe a broken windshield. It could be towing, and it could be rental. So let's start out and let's define this term of PIP that we've been talking about so far, and what exactly are PIP benefits that are offered to us under the automobile policy. So as you take a look at this, you can see that the first benefit that you receive is medical care. And when I think of medical care, I think of things like doctor's bills, hospital bills, prescription drugs, maybe physical therapy, occupational therapy. The next thing that is going to get paid under this is what's called home and auto modifications. So think that maybe I was in a bad automobile accident. I'm now in a wheelchair perhaps. And as I go back to my house, maybe my doors aren't wide enough any longer to be able to get my wheelchair through. So someone has to come in and modify my doorways in my house. Maybe I need a ramp built on the front of my house because I have steps that go into my house and I can't get my wheelchair up into the house. When you look at auto modifications, maybe I need some type of controls to be able to drive my automobile, or maybe I need it modified to be able to put my wheelchair into that automobile. When I look at attendant care, what this is this pays for assistance with daily living activities. And this can be a very big cost. It's estimated that on a bad loss, up to 60% of the PIP benefits paid out can come under attendant care. And in a bad loss, someone that's living at home, this could be coverage, or this could be care that's required 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So just to put this in perspective, in our office alone, we currently have a claim that's over $9.5 million from a bad automobile accident. And I would tell you that as I look at that, it follows that formula that I gave you, that over 60% of that cost is coming from the attendant care of having someone take care of that individual. The next three coverages that we're going to look at, work loss, replacement services, and survivor benefits, are all statutory by the state of Michigan and automatically included in your PIP benefits. So work loss is going to cover wages lost due to an automobile accident, and it covers for up to 3 years. Replacement services will also pay for up to 3 years. And what this does is it pays for services to replace household activities. So this could be cooking, cleaning, maybe someone helping you with cutting your lawn, because there are things that you can no longer perform due to the accident. And then finally, there's survivor benefits that are available, and this covers additional benefits in case there was a death that occurred. So let's take a look at PIP and let's compare it to other medical coverage. Sometimes people will ask, well, why would I want to purchase PIP coverage on my automobile when I already have health insurance? Isn't it duplicate coverage at that point? Well, if you take a look at the chart, on the left-hand column, you see all the coverages that we just reviewed. And you'll notice that as we look at health insurance, such as Blue Cross Blue Shield, Medicare, Medicaid, and PIP coverage, and we'll come to workers' comp in just a second. But as you look at that, you'll notice that medical care is picked up under all three of those. However, what you'll find out is with health insurance and Medicare and Medicaid, oftentimes there's limitations. So if I'm in a bad accident, I might be getting physical therapy and occupational therapy on a weekly basis, and it might be 5 or 6 times a week. I could exhaust those limits that are offered under my health insurance because maybe under my health insurance, I'm limited to 20 physical therapy visits a year, so I could go through that very quickly. As you go down further, you notice that when it comes to the home and auto modifications that we talked about, where the auto policy provides coverage for that, health insurance and Medicare and Medicaid does not. On the attendant care, which we had indicated can be a large portion of a claim, my health insurance doesn't provide any attendant care. And then as we follow down on the 3 statutory coverages that are part of the auto policy, the work loss, replacement services, and survivor benefits, once again, PIP doesn't cover that. As we take a look at workers' comp, you'll see that workers' compensation is a little bit broader, and it does offer 5 out of the 6 coverages, but what it doesn't offer is the replacement services. So let's take a second and let's take a look at a claim for workers' compensation in an automobile accident where we have someone that was injured during working hours. So number one, it's important to note that workers' compensation is going to be the primary coverage. And what does that mean? It means we're going to look to the workers' compensation policy first, and then after we've exhausted everything under the workers' compensation coverage, we'll turn to the auto policy and we'll look at the PIP benefits. Well, we've already indicated that we know that replacement services aren't covered under workers' compensation. So it would be the auto policy that would offer $20 per day for these replacement services for up to 3 years. But on the wage loss, what you're going to find is that on workers' compensation, there's a maximum that it will pay out per week, and that's $921. If we have someone that's earning more, and we'll get into the dollar amounts in a little while, but if we have someone that would be entitled to more than $921 per week, under PIP, you could get up to $1,278 per week. So what would happen is the PIP at this point would coordinate with the workers' compensation, and that injured worker could collect the additional $357 under the PIP. Now, you don't have to max out on these benefits. We could have someone that maybe they only got $400 a week under workers' comp, but yet under the PIP formula, maybe they were entitled to $550 a week. So again, it would be the PIP that would make up the additional $150. So next, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a look at the new PIP limit options that are available. And I would say this is probably one of the biggest changes in the law, and it's also what I think has probably grabbed the most headlines as we watch the news, read newspapers, blogs, and other sources of information. So before we get into the actual limits, I think it's first important to understand what a PIP limit applies to. So as you look at the chart in front of you, what you're going to see is there's a heavy black line that goes through the middle of that chart. And as we pick a PIP limit, and you'll see in just a second that one of the limits that you could select would be $250,000. So in my example here, if I chose a $250,000 PIP limit, what you would see is any medical care cost, home and auto modification, and attendant care would come out of that $250,000 limit. However, as you look at the coverages that are below the thick black line, these are statutory coverages that can last for up to 3 years, and the auto policy will pay these, and they're not subtracted from the PIP limit. So what you see on this is you see that on work loss, you could get up to $5,718 for any 30-day period, which over 3 years would be a little over $205,000. When you look at the replacement services, you can get $20 a day for up to 3 years, and that's just under $22,000 for the maximum that would pay out. And then finally on the survivor benefits, it could pay for up to 3 years, and it would be just over $205,000. So if I collected all of these limits and I were to get the maximum over the 3 years, that would total up to $435,000. But when I look at that $435,000, that does not get applied back against the $250,000 PIP limit that I chose. So it's very important just to note that these get paid regardless of what limit is selected. So now let's take a look at what are the new PIP limit options that we can provide. And let me start with the first three and lump these together. And this is going to be what the majority of us will see. So the first choice that we have is that we can continue with unlimited PIP coverage. And with the unlimited PIP coverage that we have right now, I would share with you that it's the broadest coverage that any state offers. There's not another state that offers unlimited PIP. I would also tell you that if you ever got into a bad accident and you had unlimited PIP, it would be the best money that you could have spent. I would say though that with no fault and unlimited, it comes with a price. So again, this year, Michigan is the most expensive state for automobile insurance. And when I did a little bit more research, we've actually had that honor for 4 years in a row. And if you go back a little bit farther than that, 7 out of the last 9 years, we've also had that honor of being the most expensive state. Well, part of that is because of the broad coverage that we offer. So as the legislation got passed, one of the goals of this legislation was to bring our automobile insurance costs down and put it more in line with other states. So the good news is if you want to, you can continue with your unlimited PIP, and there's no requirements to be able to do this. The same is true with $250,000 PIP limits and $500,000 PIP limits. So if you wanted to choose one of those limits on your auto policy, you can do that. And there's no requirements other than there's a form that you'll have to complete. The fourth option, which I don't think will affect a lot in the audience today, but let me review it, is if you're on Medicaid. And before I get into reading the definition, there's some terms in the definition that I think we should define because we're going to talk about these terms throughout the rest of the presentation. So the first term that I see is resident relative. And let's define what a resident relative is. A resident relative is somebody that lives with you, but not only do they live with you, they're related by blood, by marriage, or by adoption. And then the second thing that we're going to talk quite a bit about is that you have to have a qualified health coverage, or you need qualified health coverage. Well, how do we define what qualified health coverage is? And there's two components to it. The first component of qualified health coverage is that your health insurance cannot exclude an automobile accident. The second part of this is that the deductible that you have on your health insurance plan can't exceed $6,000. So it has to be $6,000 or less to meet this definition. So if you were on Medicare and you decided that you wanted to carry a PIP limit of $50,000, you could do that. But if you had anyone else in your household, so it could be a spouse or it could be a resident relative, in order to pick this option, they would have to be on Medicaid also, or they would have to have qualified health coverage, or they would have to have their own auto insurance policy that would provide PIP benefits for them. The last two options that you see, options 5 and 6 that are on this screen, talk about ways that you could opt out and not carry on your automobile policy any type of a PIP benefit other than those 3 that we've listed below the black line, because those are statutory. So what we're saying when we opt out then is that we won't have any medical, we won't have any attendant care, and we won't have any home or auto modifications. So if I have a health plan and I want to opt out, I can do that. But number one, it has to be a qualified health care plan. So in other words, it has to be able to cover automobile accidents. And in addition to that, it can't have a deductible of over $6,000. Not only that, if I decide to opt out, then my spouse or any relative, resident relative that's living with me must either have PIP coverage under a separate auto policy, or they must also have a qualified health plan. So again, what we're giving up here is we're giving up the attendant care and the home and auto modifications along with the medical. Similar, if you're on Medicare, you can decide that you want to opt out and not carry PIP coverage, again, because you're on Medicare. In order to do this, you have to be covered under Parts A and Part B of Medicare. And then anyone that lives with you who is a spouse or a resident relative is either going to have Medicare and have Part A and B coverage, or maybe they're younger than 65 and they're not on Medicare, so they would have to have qualified health coverage, or they would have to have PIP coverage under an automobile policy. Let's take a look and see what does this look like as we go to commercial insurance. Well, commercial insurance is going to be a little bit different. So if you have a business auto policy today, you can continue with unlimited coverage, just as what you have on the policy right now today. In addition to that, you can pick a $500,000 limit, or you could pick a $250,000 limit. The only exception to this is if you're a sole proprietor, you're going to have the same 6 options that the individual had. So one thing that I want to point out to you, and this is going to be confusing, is the state of Michigan has developed a new form, and what they're requiring is as you pick a PIP limit, you're going to have to complete this form, and you're going to have to mail it back to the insurance company. So it's going to be the insurance company that's going to send this form out to you. You'll usually see it either emailed or mailed to you 60 to 90 days in advance of the renewal of your insurance policy, and you need to complete it and return it. It'll give you a date that it has to be returned by, and if it isn't returned, the way that the new law is written is that the insurance company will renew your automobile policy, and it will automatically select unlimited PIP for you. So you no longer are going to choose the limit, it's going to be chosen for you. So if you want to choose any other limit than unlimited, it's critical that you get this back to the insurance company in the prescribed time that they indicate when they send it out. Next, I thought it might be a good idea to go through an example, and we're going to use the example that I have here as far as the cost. On every example I use, we're going to use the same numbers on this so you know where it comes from. So let's walk through an example. Let's say that Sally is involved in an automobile accident. It's a bad accident, and she's rushed to the hospital by ambulance. It turns out that she stays in the hospital for 3 months. She has multiple surgeries, she has MRIs, she has x-rays, certainly prescription drugs while she's in. She has physical therapy, she has occupational therapy, and she has medical care once she gets out of the hospital also. Luckily, after 3 months, she's able to return home, but she still needs attendant care, and she needs someone to help her with her daily living activities, and she has some work loss also. So as we go through this, we're going to say that in all of our examples, her medical care was $1 million. The home and auto modifications she needs were $100,000, and the attendant care was $250,000. In this case, because she was injured for 3 years and missed 3 years of work, she's going to have the maximum under work loss of the $199,500, and her replacement services she'll max out at $21,900. So the total claim that we would be looking at is $1,571,400. So now let's take a look at a chart. And I know that as you look at this chart, it's probably a good thing that you're sitting in front of a computer screen because it is a little busy. But what I want to do is I want to take a look, and let me explain this chart because we're going to use this chart throughout the presentation. So if you look on the left-hand side, on the first column that says PIP benefit, those are going to be all of the benefits that are offered under a PIP policy under your automobile policy. So we have the medical care, the home and auto modifications, and the attendant care. Then just to remind you, we have the thick black line, and on the thick black line, wage loss and replacement services don't come out of the PIP limit that Sally has selected. So in our first example, let's say that Sally selected a $250,000 PIP limit. And I have all of those limits listed across the top of the screen. So I draw your attention to the red box around the $250,000 PIP limit. So as we know, Sally had $1 million of medical care costs, but she only selected a $250,000 PIP limit. So she's $750 short on her auto policy, on her PIP limit, that she's not going to be able to collect under the auto policy. We know that she had home and auto modifications of $100,000, but because she's already exhausted her $250,000 limit with the medical, nothing's going to get paid for the home and auto modification. The same thing happens with attendant care, that because she's already used up her PIP limit, there's nothing left to cover the attendant care. So in this particular claim, as we look at it, Sally is going to have an out-of-pocket cost of $1.1 million. Now, had Sally kept the unlimited benefits that we all enjoy in the state of Michigan right now, you can see that everything would have been covered and she wouldn't have had any out-of-pocket cost on this. So next, let's look at a work-related example. So now what we have is we have a business auto policy, and we have a worker that's injured while they're driving during work. So it might be that they were driving a delivery truck. It could be that they were a salesperson out making calls, but they get injured during work. So one of the things that you'll notice in this example is that workers' compensation is the primary coverage. And with it being primary, what that means is it's going to respond first, and then our PIP limit is going to apply second. So as you look at the medical care, the home and auto modification, and the attendant care, regardless of the limit that goes across the top that the business owner selected on their business auto policy, workers' compensation picks all that up. When we go below the black line, what you're going to notice is that there are $199,500 of wage losses that you could have collected under the PIP, but workers' compensation would max out at $143,000. So what does that mean? Well, under workers' compensation, if you earn above $72,000 a year, the most that you can collect is $921 a week under workers' compensation benefits. However, PIP works a little bit differently. So if you earn, and the limit goes from $72,000 up to $78,000, but if you earn over $78,000, the most that you can collect under PIP per week is $1,278. So when you do that arithmetic, what we're saying is that PIP pays $357 more per week than what workers' comp would if you're above what the maximum wages are. But conversely, you could have something where maybe you were below that. So maybe you only were entitled to $500 a week for workers' comp, but maybe under PIP you would get $650 a week. The PIP will still make that $150 up. So in my example here, what happens is workers' compensation over those 4 or 3 years would pay the $143,676, and then PIP would step in, and that's where you can see the red box, and they would pay an additional $55,824. And how they arrive at that number, it's just the additional $357 a week times 3 years, so that the injured party would get the entire $199,500. What's important to note here is by the green boxes at the bottom is that in this accident, the injured employee is made whole and has no out-of-pocket cost. So now let's change this up just a little bit, and let's look at another example. And this is going to be an accident that involves a vehicle. It's still insured under the business auto policy, but it's not being used for work. And this is a pretty common example that I see. So in our example here, what we're going to say is we have Steve, and he has a company vehicle. And Steve could be the owner of the business that insures his vehicle under that business policy, or Steve might be an employee who's allowed to take that vehicle home in the evening, and it's okay for him to use it to run to the grocery store, to go to church on Sunday, and so on. But what happens is it's Saturday morning, and Steve is dropping his daughter off at soccer practice. And on the way to soccer practice, he gets into a bad automobile accident. When he gets into this bad automobile accident, let's look at a couple different scenarios. Let's suppose that the business owner on the business policy had chose unlimited, which is what we all have on those policies right now. And again, we have the same incurred expenses that we've been using in all of our examples. So if you look at the green box and you look at the bottom, you'll see that in this example, Steve is completely covered and he has no out-of-pocket cost. But let's say that the employer had decided on their business auto policy to pick a $250,000 limit. Well, in that case, you can see that there's a shortfall in the red box of $1.1 million. So the question that I get asked very often on this is, well, I understand that the employer chose a $250,000 limit and I was driving my company car, but I also have a personal auto policy for the vehicle that my wife drives. So couldn't I go over to my personal vehicle where I have unlimited PIP because that's the limit that I chose, and couldn't I get my personal auto policy to pick that difference up? And the answer is no. So the fact that you're driving that company vehicle, you're going to be bound by the limit that they, being the business, picked as to what you're going to be able to get. So that's a big difference that I see going forward that didn't used to exist. For just a second, I want to talk about motorcycles. This may not apply to a lot of you because you don't have motorcycles, but you may be surprised to learn that it applies to every one of you. And what do I mean by that? Well, a motorcyclist in Michigan, if they're involved in an accident with an automobile, it doesn't matter if the motorcyclist is at fault or if they're not at fault. The vehicle that they hit, it's going to be that vehicle's PIP that covers the injuries to the motorcyclist and a passenger that they might have on the motorcycle. So today I'm driving my motorcycle. I run a stop sign and I hit your vehicle. Because everyone in the state has unlimited medical right now, I would pick up unlimited medical under your automobile policy. Well, going forward, what's going to happen is people can determine what PIP limit they want to choose, and we've already covered those limits. So for this example, let's just suppose that somebody chose a $250,000 PIP limit. I'm now riding my motorcycle and I run into the side of their car. Instead of having unlimited PIP benefits, I'm now bound to the $250,000 that they purchased on their automobile. When this wouldn't apply is if for some reason that person didn't have automobile insurance, and I would throw out that right now it's estimated that 1 out of 5 drivers in the state of Michigan don't carry automobile insurance. So if I'm on my motorcycle and I hit that car with no automobile insurance, it's going to go back to my personal auto policy that I carry, and whatever limits I've selected on my personal auto policy are going to be the limits that would apply for that accident. Or if that individual decided to opt out of PIP coverage because they had a qualified health insurance plan, then at that point, once again, it would go back to my policy. One thing to keep in mind though is if I'm riding my motorcycle and I just miss a corner and I go off the road and I injure myself, because I didn't hit another car and a motorcycle policy doesn't have PIP coverage, the only coverage I'm going to have is the medical coverage that I buy under my under my motorcycle policy, and of course my health insurance policy. The highest medical coverage that you can buy under under a motorcycle policy that I'm aware of is $50,000. So you can see that you can go through that limit very quickly. On a commercial note, one thing to consider here, and there's nothing that you can do about it, but just be aware of it, is that if you have a vehicle and a motorcycle runs into the side of it, you're going to be responsible for the PIP. Well, why does this matter to a commercial account? Well, the reason is as you get into bigger fleets of automobiles, it's the commercial auto policy that would be covering those vehicles, and those policies are experience rated. So the better experience that I have on my fleet of vehicles, the better my insurance premium is going to be. So let me give you an example in our office of a claim that we had. I had a semi-truck going through a green light, and there was a motorcyclist who was drunk that ran the red light and ran into the side of our semi-truck. When he did that, he was seriously injured, and to date, we paid over $1 million for that claim. Well, for the commercial insured, when the insurance company takes a look at that, that's $1 million that got paid under their policy, and it's had a negative impact on what their experience is. So consequently, what's happened is that their insurance premium has gone up. So motorcycles are a little bit different animal. The next thing I want to take a look at is the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, often referred to as the MCCA. So this was established in 1978, and what it was designed to do is provide unlimited lifetime benefits for an auto accident. So let me explain how it works today. If you get into a bad automobile accident, your insurance company, so let's say it might be a State Farm or an Auto Owners or a Frankenmuth, they're going to pay the first $580,000 of that claim. Anything higher than $580,000 gets turned over to the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, or the MCCA. So in my example that I shared with you, where we had a loss in our agency right now that's in excess of $9.5 million, let's just say that that loss was $9,580,000. So if Frankenmuth or Auto Owners had written that account, they would have paid the first $580,000 of that claim, and the MCCA fund would have picked up the next $9 million of that claim. Well, as you can see from the chart that's up on the screen right now, if you were to look at your auto policy right now, you pay $220 per every vehicle that's on your auto policy to have unlimited PIP. And before July 2nd, this is the only option that was available to us, was unlimited PIP. After July 2nd, we now know, since we reviewed the limits, that we can choose different PIP limits. So I can continue with my unlimited PIP if I choose to do that. And the good news is, for doing nothing and just keeping unlimited PIP, the cost on my personal auto policy or commercial auto policy will drop from $220 to $100. So by doing nothing, I've saved $120 of cost under the new law. If I decide that I'm going to do something different than unlimited, so maybe I pick a $250,000 limit, or I pick a $500,000 limit, by the chart you can see that there won't be any PIP charge on my policy going forward. And just as a fun fact, I throw this out, but in 1978, when this was first established, each one of us that had a vehicle would pay $3 per vehicle to have unlimited PIP. But you can see over time, with medical inflation, the amount of claims that went into the MCCA fund, that it went from $3 in 1978 to the current limit of $220. The next thing I want to talk about is something called the new PIP order of priority. And I would tell you that this is a subtle change on the policy, but can have a big impact. When I say a subtle change, what do I mean? Well, when we talked about PIP, we already said that there was a form that was going to get sent to us. We had to pick a limit, and then we had to mail that back. So we're making a decision at that point what we want to do. When we get into the PIP order of priority, this is a change in the law in how PIP coverage is provided, but there's nothing that we do that we have to change something. But what we're going to learn here shortly is there may be situations that are covered today that won't be covered going forward. So as we look at this, it is a very significant change, and it actually will take place on July 2nd, 2020 on all policies that renew or new policies that are written. There are a few insurance companies that have already put this order of priority into place back in the fall of last year, and that would be on any policy that renewed or was written after the date that it went in place. So what does this mean? Well, you can see that I have a new PIP order of priority chart, and I would start with saying that I think there's probably what I would refer to as a lot of insurance ease in this whole chart as I go through it. And if you don't study insurance, I'm not sure that you're going to get a great understanding of what this means. So let me walk through this and attempt to explain it. But more importantly, what I'm going to do after I walk through this chart is I'm going to give some real life examples so you can see what this means and how this might affect you. The first thing that you notice when you look at the chart is on the previous order, there were 5 different scenarios that were covered, but on the new order going forward after July 2nd, there's only 3 scenarios that are covered. The first two scenarios in both cases are the same. So let me walk through examples on both of those. So what we're doing when we look at the PIP order of priority is I'm involved in an automobile accident, and I start at the top of this list. And as soon as one of these things apply to me, I then stop and I don't go down any farther in the PIP order of priority because I now found the insurance policy that's going to respond to my injuries. So in my first example, I have my own auto policy. I'm involved in an automobile accident and I'm injured. Well, it's my policy that covers me. So that's pretty straightforward, and that doesn't change under the new order. Let's look at the second example. Now I don't have an auto insurance policy, but my wife or my husband has an automobile insurance policy, or a resident relative that lives with me has an auto insurance policy. So now I'm in a car, I'm injured. I would look to their automobile policy to cover me for PIP. And that doesn't change under the new scenario or under the new order either. The next two items, though, no longer exist. So this next example is the policy, the owner of the vehicle in which the injury occurs. So I don't have an automobile policy, and I don't live with anyone that has an automobile policy. If I'm involved in an automobile accident today, and let's say that I was riding in your car and I was injured, your automobile policy would pay my PIP benefits. Going forward, this has been taken off the table and no longer is there coverage for that. So now let's look down to item number 4. And now what happens is maybe we have someone driving a car that they borrowed, but unfortunately the car they borrowed didn't have any automobile insurance on it. So what happens is there's an accident and someone's injured in that car. We're going to look to the policy of the driver of the car because they had an auto insurance policy even though the vehicle owner didn't. Well, with number 3 and number 4 going away, the last thing that you see on there is the Michigan Assigned Claims Plan. It was very hard to get to the Michigan Assigned Claims Plan prior to this change. Now it's going to be much easier to have to file a claim under the Michigan Assigned Claims Plan. And what I note on that is that it has a limit of $250,000. So what happens is under that plan, you can only collect $250,000. And I also point out that it not only applies to personal auto, but it could be a pedestrian, so you being hit by a car, or also if you're on your bicycle and you were to get hit. So let's ask some questions around this to start to make more sense of how this might apply to you. So some of the questions you'd want to be asking yourself are, do you have children who are using a vehicle titled in your name, but they've established residency elsewhere? Do you live with someone? So this could be maybe a boyfriend, girlfriend, maybe they've been living together for 3 or 4 years, but they just haven't got married. And let's say that the boyfriend has 2 automobiles titled to him, and he insures both the vehicles, but his girlfriend drives one of the vehicles, and she doesn't have an auto policy. Let's take a look and ask, does anyone in your house drive for Uber, Shipt, Lyft, Grubhub? This can pose a number of different problems. Number one, it can certainly have an impact on PIP, but I would also point out that most insurance policies exclude this. So you could be surprised to learn that if you were driving for one of these companies, you got into an automobile accident and maybe you had $20,000 worth of damage to your car, that the auto insurance carrier would come back and deny coverage because they don't cover these services under the policy. There are specific policies out there that do cover these. However, I would share with you that it's going to be more expensive. And then finally, do you allow anyone to drive your vehicle who does not live with you and does not have his or her own auto insurance? So as you think through these examples, let me help maybe make them more clear. So let's take a look under the new PIP order of priority, where there used to be coverage under an auto policy, but there no longer is. So let's take a parent. I have a mother now, she no longer drives, she sold her car, and she no longer has an auto policy. But being the good son, I do pick her up, I take her out to dinner, I also take her to doctor's visits and so on. And let's suppose that while I'm taking her to the doctor's office for a visit, that we get in an automobile accident. Well, under the old PIP order of priority, my mother would find coverage under my automobile policy because I had PIP coverage. Under the new order of priority, this has gone away. So now when my mother's injured in that accident, because she no longer has an automobile policy, she would have to fall down to the Michigan assigned claims plan for the $250,000 limit or look to her own health insurance for coverage. When we look at the unmarried couple that we talked about earlier, a boyfriend, girlfriend living together, I could have an auto policy with two autos, both listed on the boyfriend's name, and I could even have the girlfriend listed as a driver on that policy. But if she's involved in an automobile accident with that vehicle, because she doesn't fit the definition under the new PIP order of priority, she no longer has any PIP coverage under my policy. We've already talked a little bit about Uber, Shift, Lyft, and Grub to be very careful and talk to your agent if you're doing any of those, because it can have a big impact on your coverage. The final one, and I've seen this happen before, is that you have an adult child and they graduated from college. They've moved over to Grand Rapids, they've gotten a job maybe at the hospital, let's say that they're a nurse. They take a look at how much it costs to insure their automobile, and it's been on your policy up until this point because they've been in college and there was coverage that was afforded under your policy. And be careful on that. You'll want to check with your agent to make sure that's the case because each policy could be a little different. But now they've moved out on their own. So they've got their own apartment over in Grand Rapids. I sort of describe it as a bird in a robin's nest. So the robin has now taken the baby robin, kicked it out of the nest, and that robin is on its own. So that's your child in Grand Rapids. But they're astonished to find that when they go and get auto insurance, maybe their policy costs $2,000 a year, but yet on your policy, because you have a two-car discount and you're a little bit older and some different rating factors, maybe their car only costs $1,200 on your policy. So being the good parent that you are, you say, you know what, I'm going to help you out on the first year on your automobile insurance where you get grounded over in Grand Rapids and get a start. And I'm either going to allow you just to give me the $1,200 that I'm paying, so you'll save $800 that way. Or maybe I say, you know what I'll do is I'll pay for your auto insurance that first year. And then after that, you're going to have to go ahead and get your own policy. Well, once again, under the new order of priority, because they're no longer a resident relative of your house, if they get in an accident while driving that car, they have no PIP coverage. So you can see that these are very significant changes, but there's not a form that you're going to have to sign. So on these situations that we discussed, if you think any of them apply to you, make sure to have a conversation with your agent or your risk advisor. Next, I want to take a look at the commercial order of priority. And I won't go into great depth on this, but similar to the personal order of priority, there's also one for commercial. So we've already touched on the point that with this, on a vehicle that is written on the business auto policy, but that the employee drives or the owner of the business drives, if they're to get into an accident, the business insurance policy, whatever limit they selected, so remember they can select $250, $500, or unlimited, will be what will apply to the person driving that vehicle. If for some reason that policy had canceled and there was no coverage, then the person injured would look to their own insurance policy. And if they didn't have an insurance policy, they would look to see if the spouse in their house had an insurance policy or another resident relative in the house had an insurance policy and they'd be covered in that. If not, it would end up at the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, or I'm sorry, at the Michigan Assigned Claims Plan. And remember, there's only a $250,000 limit there. So let me give some examples to maybe drive this home a little bit, because this is very important. So it's oftentimes that I see a business owner that will go ahead and he'll insure his vehicle or the vehicle that he drives under his business auto policy. And not only does he use it for business, but he also uses it for personal. So he's using this vehicle and he decides that he wants to go up north for the weekend and he has his family in the vehicle. He may have a personal auto policy on the other policy that his wife and he drive, but he has the company car at that point. Well, if he's involved in an accident, he's going to be limited to what it is that the business chose on their PIP limit. This could also happen where you allow an employee to take a company vehicle home. Maybe it's the foreman of a job in a construction company, and it's quicker for him to drive from home to the job site than to come to your office and pick the pickup truck up. In your fleet management program that you have with them, you say that it's okay that they use the pickup truck on the weekend. Please keep the use down to a minimum. But if you need to use it to run to the grocery store, or if your wife has the other car, you want to use it, we're okay with that. Once again, when that employee gets in an accident, he's going to be subject to what the limit is that the business chose. Another consideration is the owner of a business can exclude themselves under workers' compensation. So if you remember in our previous example on workers' compensation, what we talked about was that workers' compensation was primary. Well, if I don't have any workers' compensation because I've excluded myself, I'm going to have to rely on the PIP limit that I chose on my business auto policy. And then the final example I have here is you could have a salesperson that's driving a company car, but let's suppose during the day that they have something personal that they're going to use that car for. So I'm a salesperson, and it just so happens today at 2 o'clock I have a dentist appointment. So I'm going to take an hour off of work to go get my teeth cleaned, and then I'll come back to work and finish my day up. Well, when I'm driving that car and I'm headed to the dentist appointment, no longer am I working for the company. I'm using that for personal use. So if I get involved in an accident as that salesperson, again, I'm going to have to rely on the PIP limit that the business chose, and workers' comp wouldn't come into play here because I wasn't on company business. The next topic that I want to cover is there's also a PIP order of priority for vehicles that are for hire. So that's non-emergency medical vehicles used for transport, limousines, party buses. And I realize that probably 99% of you in the room today are in this business, and this may not apply to you. But I would share with you that this, similar to the motorcycle example, might apply more than what you think. So as you look at this order of priority, what stands out to me is that whatever limit that limousine, that party bus, or that medical transport company picks, if I'm injured in that vehicle, I'm going to be subject to the PIP limit that they choose. So let me give you an example and maybe drive this home a little bit. Let me take you back 22 years, back when the Red Wings were actually what I would call a hockey dynasty. 6 days after winning the Stanley Cup, Vladimir Konstantinov had gone to a golf outing, and being a responsible individual, he knew that there was going to be alcohol involved. So what he decided to do was to rent a limousine for himself and a couple others that would deliver him home in the evening so that they didn't have to drive after they were drinking. Well, unfortunately, as you may know, the limousine was involved in a bad accident, and actually for Vladimir, he had a career-ending spinal cord injury in this accident. Well, back then, because all of the policies had unlimited PIP benefits on it, under this limousine, he received unlimited PIP benefits. And although I can't tell you today how much has been paid out on that claim, I can put an educated guess together and tell you that it's been well in excess of $10 million. Because he had unlimited, or because the limo company had unlimited PIP, that's what he would have received, because that was what everyone in the state of Michigan had. Now going forward, let's say that that limo company decided that they were going to pick a $250,000 limit under their commercial policy. He would have only had $250,000 of coverage. But yet what I just said is he probably had in excess of $10 million in costs so far. So what he could do is he could look at suing the limo company to make up the difference between the $250,000 and the $10 million that he would have paid out. Well, in this case, he did end up suing the limo company, but not for medical, but for pain and suffering because of the injuries. And that particular limo company had a $2 million liability limit, which he collected on. So if we took those circumstances, moved it forward, and they only had a $250,000 PIP limit, but a $2 million bodily injury limit, he could have sued, but the most that you would have gotten is those two added together, so $2,250,000. So he would be well short of the $10 million that he spent so far on this claim. You're probably asking, well, how would this affect me? Because the chances are, I don't know that I'll have a limousine. Well, the reason that I bring it up is it's not unusual to see people rent limousines for weddings. Sometimes you'll see them for proms where you'll put your children in the back of a limousine because you think it's safer than allowing them to drive on prom night. Maybe you've rented a limousine to go to a concert with a group of friends, or perhaps it was a sporting event that you went to. One of the questions you might want to ask the limousine company that you're going to go ahead and rent this vehicle from or use this vehicle with is to ask them what type of PIP limits do they carry? Because if it's involved in a bad accident, you're going to be subject to the limit that they selected. Next, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about liability. And if you recall, what we said was there was two buckets that we were going to talk about. So we've spent a lot of time on the first bucket, and that has to do with PIP coverage, or that has to do with medical coverage. Now we're going to look at the liability side of it, and that would be our second bucket. So as we look at the liability, there's really two different types of liability. The first is bodily injury. And if you think of bodily injury, that simply protects me if I were to get sued. So I'm driving my automobile, I run a stop sign, I injure somebody, and they come back and they sue me. And remember, today for them to sue me, it would have to be because of a serious injury, disfigurement, or death. The second part of liability coverage is uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. So what this is a coverage that's on my policy that's going to protect me. So now let's reverse the example. In the second example, I'm driving, but somebody runs the stop sign and they hit me. I decide that I'm going to sue that individual, but when I go to sue them, it just so happens that they're that 1 out of 5 drivers that doesn't have automobile insurance. So let's say that I got a $500,000 judgment. The chances of me collecting $500,000 if they didn't buy an auto insurance policy are probably pretty slim. So if I would have had a $500,000 uninsured motorist limit on my policy, I would have collected that $500,000 on my policy. Let's look at underinsured. Works exactly the same way, but going forward in the state of Michigan, I'm going to have to carry at least $50,000 of liability coverage. So now if I go and I sue that individual and they had $50,000 of liability coverage, although I got a $500,000 judgment, their policy is only going to pay me the $50,000 that they purchased, and there's a $450,000 shortfall. So again, if I had $500,000 of coverage for underinsured motorist coverage, I would collect that under my own policy. So as we take a look at this, one of the things that you're going to know is under the old law, I never had to be worried about getting sued for someone's uncovered medical care, their home and auto modifications and attendant care, because every auto policy had unlimited benefits. Now going forward, if somebody chooses a lower limit and they use that entire limit up, I can get sued for the difference, in addition to what I used to be able to be sued for, which was if I caused serious injury, disfigurement, or death. So my liability as a vehicle owner and a driver in Michigan has gone up significantly. On a commercial concern, one of the things that I would point out is social inflation. And I define social inflation as the rising cost of insurance claims due to increased litigation, broader definition of liability, more plaintiff-friendly legal decisions, and larger compensatory jury awards. So this comes about from usually a general anti-business sentiment, and I just bring that to your attention because we are seeing larger awards than what we used to see. So I want to take a look at the new liability limits. And when we look at the new liability limits, what you're going to notice is that before no-fault reform went in, on my personal auto policy or business policy, I had to carry at least coverage if I was involved in an accident and injured someone, $20,000 per individual injured and $40,000 per accident. Well, going forward, the new minimum liability limits are $50,000 per individual that gets injured and $100,000 per accident. So what this means is that to get my car on the road in the state of Michigan, the new limits of $50,000 is what I'm going to have to carry, so that if I get sued, I have at least $50,000 of coverage to cover that lawsuit. However, when this law got passed, they came up with something that they refer to as a default liability limit. And what that means is there's now another form that you're going to have to fill out. So if you remember the first form that we were filling out, that was to pick what we were going to have for our PIP limits. We now also have to pick what we want for bodily injury limits. So the insurance carrier is going to mail this form to you. And on this form, you're going to select what limit you want. If you don't return the form back to the insurance carrier, they're automatically going to default to the higher limit of $250,000 per person injured, $500,000 for the accident. Now, if you happen to have higher limits than this, they certainly won't take your limits down. They'll leave the higher limits on your policy. So by not returning the form, no longer will you be able to purchase the $50,000 limit. So again, let's go through just a sample of an auto claim, and we're going to use the exact same cost that we have in the past, but we're going to look at it a little bit differently. Now we're going to look at it from a liability standpoint. So if we remember Sally's accident that we talked about in the beginning, let's suppose that Sally wasn't at fault in the accident and that James, who was driving the other vehicle, was. So let's take a look and see what could happen to James in the way of liability. So in the first example that's outlined by the green box, because Sally chose unlimited coverage, what you're going to see is that there is no out-of-pocket cost to Sally. So the only thing that James could be sued for is the pain and suffering that we had talked about in the past. But let's suppose now that Sally chose a $250,000 PIP limit. In addition to James being sued for the pain and suffering, he could also have $1,100,000 that he could be liable for that he would have never had under the old law. Next thing I want to touch on quickly, because I know we're running out of time, is there's going to be a medical fee schedule that's going to go in place effective July 2021. And you'll notice on your screen that that's bolded. The reason for that is that's a year away from now. So right now on an automobile loss, let's say that I had an MRI, and let's say that Blue Cross got charged $700 from that MRI. If you look at your statement of benefits, you might note that to the medical provider, they only paid $350, and that's what the medical provider gets paid under the fee schedule. Well, today, under an auto accident, if the medical provider billed the insurance company $750, it would pay the full $750. So as of July 2021, the automobile is also going to have a fee schedule. Why is this important? Well, number one is you pick your PIP limits for the first year of auto reform. Think that your limits aren't going to go as far because the cost of medical is going to be more expensive. Conversely, if you're involved in an accident and you're at fault and someone else is injured and they come back to sue you, they're going to have higher medical bills that you could be expected to have to reimburse them for in the way of a lawsuit. The next coverage that I'll talk about very quickly is mini tort coverage. So what mini tort is as we know today in the state of Michigan, because we're no fault, the other person is responsible for insuring their vehicle. But let's take an example where I have a vehicle that I didn't carry collision insurance on because it was only worth $5,000. We get in an accident and you're at fault. Well, today I can come back to you because I didn't have coverage on that and you were at fault, and I could collect up to $1,000 under that policy. So it wouldn't pay for the whole $5,000 of damage to my car, but at least I could get $1,000. Going forward, that limit on July 2nd increases from $1,000 to $3,000. So on commercial auto, one of the concerns is many times a client may not turn those smaller claims in to be paid by their insurance carrier because they know that it's going to affect their experience with the business auto policy and have an effect on their price. So now, instead of covering $1,000, they could cover up to $3,000. So we've had a lot of what I call building blocks up to this point in order to put this all together. Now what I'd like to do is say, or be able to cover, what is it that you want to consider going forward to protect yourself and also your business? So one of the things I think that you'd want to do is consider unlimited PIP coverage. I know myself, I won't be giving that coverage up, and I can say that if you're ever involved in a serious accident, it'll be the best dollars that you ever spent. I also know on my personal policy, by keeping it, I'm still going to save $120 per vehicle. So based on my 2 cars, I'm going to save $240 because of the new reduced cost on that. We've already talked about the higher liability limits and that there's more exposure driving a vehicle in Michigan or owning a vehicle. So you're going to want to review what bodily injury limits you carry on your auto policy. In addition to that, we're going to want to take a look at uninsured, underinsured motorists. Now that you could be involved in an accident and maybe you chose a limit less than unlimited, so $250,000, you may want to sue that other party for your uncovered losses. And when you do that, if they don't have enough limits or they're uninsured, you're going to be turning back to your policy. Very important to review the PIP order of priority. We've already talked about that, but if you have any questions, ask your agent on that, because you may find out you don't have coverage where you used to. I would also consider purchasing an umbrella policy for your business or for you individually, or if you already have one, you might consider increasing the limits that you have on that umbrella. On a personal umbrella, I'd also point out that some companies will allow your umbrella to write uninsured, underinsured motorists on that. So you might ask that question of your agent, whether that's offered under your personal umbrella, and get a price to see if you want to do that. Also, when we look at businesses, it's going to be very important to have a strong risk management program that includes a comprehensive fleet management program so that you can decrease your overall risk as we look at this law going forward. Real quick, I'll just touch on the concept of an umbrella. I think most of us are familiar with it, but for a personal umbrella, it goes over the top of your home, your recreational vehicles like snowmobiles, boats, and your automobile. So let's say that I ran that stop sign and on my automobile, I had $500,000 of liability, but I get sued for $1 million. Well, I will exhaust my $500,000 limit on my personal auto policy, but because I had an umbrella policy of $1 million, my umbrella will pick up the remaining $500,000 in that loss. Similarly, in commercial insurance, for a business, the commercial umbrella goes over the top of the business itself, it goes over the top of their fleet of automobiles, and it goes over the top of their workers' compensation. So let me end with the takeaways that I hope that you've learned from this session. So in the beginning, as you recall, we had asked some questions. We said, does my auto insurance, health insurance, and workers' compensation cover the same things? Well, by now, I think we all realize that no, auto insurance through PIP coverage is much broader, and the unlimited coverage is the broadest coverage that I can buy. And again, I might add the broadest coverage available in the United States. Are there people in my household who are no longer covered under my policy? And the answer to that question is maybe. We walked through a number of different examples, but again, get to your agent or your risk advisor and ask them about that. Should I keep my unlimited medical PIP coverage or switch to one of the new lower limits? Well, that's going to be entirely up to you what you want to do, but I would tell you by keeping the unlimited, you're still going to see a reduction in your premium, and if you ever get into a serious automobile accident, you're going to be very happy that you have that coverage. And then finally, is there more liability under the new law? And I think as we all know now, yes, there is a lot more liability under the new law. So with that, I put up the final slide. I put questions. You'll see my email address up there. It's P and my last name, EWEND @SBUINS.com. So if this has raised questions for you that you'd like answered, please feel free to send me an email and I'll get an answer back to you. Or I also put my phone number at Saginaw Bay Underwriters up on the screen, and that's 752-8600. Feel free to give me a call, and I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with you.
Thank you, Peter. I want to thank you and Saginaw Bay Underwriters for joining us today. I also want to thank once again our sponsors, Dow, AT&T, Saginaw Valley State University, Consumers Energy, Great Lakes Bay Michigan Works, Next Here, and of course, Saginaw Future Inc. The Chamber will continue providing ongoing communications of information through our website, which is www.saginawchamber.org, and through our newsletter, which is At a Glance, and our ongoing email updates. We want to thank you for participating in today's webinar and hope all of you continue to be safe and healthy as we look towards a new world and a new way of doing things. Please have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.